Tonight, the deadly hurricane ravaging the Caribbean now racing towards Jamaica. Hurricane Beryl, the earliest Atlantic storm on record to reach Category 5 intensity. The storm ripping apart homes, knocking out power, and leaving a widespread path of destruction. Communities reeling from the devastation as Jamaica prepares for the most dangerous storm to hit the island in decades. Our Sam Brock is there speaking to those bracing for the worst, and Bill Cairns is standing by to time it out. Could the storm make a U.S. landfall? We'll have the latest track. Also tonight, Trump's sentencing delayed. The former president's lawyers arguing the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity should clear his hush money convictions. But does Trump have a case? The judge now pushing the hearing much closer to the election, the potential repercussions. Plus, Trump's former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani's fall from grace. The former New York mayor who led the city during 9/11, now disbarred in his home state for lying about the 2020 election. Deadly stampede, horrifying moments as thousands attend a religious gathering in India. Dozens crushed after overcrowding triggers mass panic. People trampled as they tried to flee. The tragedy rocking the region as the death toll rises. New Epstein revelations. A Florida judge releasing grand jury records about disgraced financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The shocking discovery. Documents revealing prosecutors knew Epstein was accused of sexually assaulting teenage girls 2 years before cutting a plea deal with him. And the allegations those prosecutors treated the victims more like criminals. Heroic ocean rescue, incredible body camera video showing the moments first responders saved 9 beachgoers trapped in rip currents, the frantic efforts to pull them to safety. And God's influencer, Pope Francis, and the College of Cardinals approving the first ever millennial saint. The 15-year-old remembered for using the web to spread awareness of the Catholic faith, now deemed the patron saint of the internet. And new hope for those suffering from Alzheimer's, the drug just approved by the FDA, promising to slow the disease's progression. Top Story starts right now. Good evening. I'm Ellison Barber in for Tom Llamas. Tonight, Hurricane Beryl charging toward Jamaica as the deadly and monstrous storm churns in the Caribbean. The hurricane, which rapidly intensified into a Category 5 storm, packing 160-mile-per-hour winds, slammed into several islands at Category 4 strength. Devastating video showing a massive trail of destruction in Grenada, where Beryl made landfall. The extent of the damage in much of the region still unknown, with the storm knocking out power and cell phone service. In Barbados, strong winds and rough seas catching fishermen off guard. Reports of significant damage to a number of boats in that area. The extremely dangerous storm now setting its sights on Jamaica, where it's expected to downgrade but will still lash the region as a major hurricane with intense winds, rain, and life-threatening coastal flooding. It will continue to weaken as it moves on, but meteorologists are not ruling out the possibility for the system to make U.S. landfall along the Gulf Coast. Bill Cairns is standing by to explain. Beryl is an unprecedented hurricane for a number of reasons. Fueled by record warm ocean temperatures, the storm is the earliest Category 5 on record for the Atlantic. It is the strongest June and July hurricane in the region and the fastest rapid intensification of any hurricane before the season reaches its usual peak in September. Meteorologists warning that this is setting the tone for a very dangerous hurricane season to come. We're going to start tonight with NBC's Sam Brock in Jamaica, where millions brace for Beryl.
Tonight, the monster storm pummeling the Caribbean with drenching rain and life-threatening winds and storm surge.
That was bad. That was bad.
Hurricane Beryl, now barreling towards Jamaica, has a potentially catastrophic Category 4, expected to be the worst storm to hit here in nearly 2 decades.
I am encouraging all Jamaicans to take the hurricane as a serious threat.
It's also the strongest hurricane to ever form in the Atlantic this early in the season, linked to warming waters from climate change.
Ignoring climate change is deadly and dangerous and irresponsible.
Hurricane Beryl rapidly intensified as it made landfall in Grenada on Monday, devastating the islands of Petite Martinique and Carriacou.
The situation is grim. There is no power. There's almost complete destruction of homes and buildings on the island.
Officials say the storm has killed at least 6 people, a number they caution will likely rise. Beryl also leaving a trail of destruction in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, including ripping the roof off this school.
This is actually the strongest storm that we've had come through St. Vincent in my lifetime.
In Venezuela, water rushed down streets as families waded through water looking for their belongings. And at this marina in Barbados, boats tossed on their sides, sitting atop piles of debris.
This is a lot of work.
Tonight, heavy winds and rain hitting the Dominican Republic. While here in Jamaica, businesses line this stretch of road on the Caribbean, those selling fish and drinks not about to leave their livelihoods.
I've done it already. I got through it and I can do it again and get through this one.
And Sam Brock joins us now from Kingston, Jamaica. Sam, as that hurricane just bears down on Jamaica, there is some confusion there over shelters and evacuations. Any clarity tonight?
Yeah, that's right, Allison. And look, we spent a couple of hours today going back with the Jamaica Tourism Board to try to really clarify what's going on here, because we reached out to the Office of Emergency Management and could not get clarity on the fact that they have hundreds of shelters posted on their websites and social media platforms, and all of them showed closed. And we're like, well, that can't be. So after a couple of hours of this, it turns out the shelters are not even open yet. I was told by the Tourism Board that a lot of the folks that run them were at work today. They were finishing up their jobs. They may open it later tonight and potentially have evacuations, potentially tomorrow, as this storm is coming in. I mean, certainly from our vantage point, that might seem like it's a little bit tardy in terms of trying to react to people that could be in harm's way. But to give you a snapshot of what we're seeing on the ground, Ellison, I'm talking to all these business owners, and they are really worried about protecting their properties, about looting, about their investments there. They're not worried about evacuating. This whole area where I'm standing is super low lying. That's basically the Caribbean. This is Kingston Harbor right there. It's right up against the main highway with no storm activity yet. It's super calm. It's completely placid at the moment. You know this whole area is going to be probably flooded out with the 3 to 5 feet of storm surge, and yet no one wants to move. You heard it from a woman a second ago. I said, what would it take for you to actually leave your business tonight? And she said, absolutely nothing. And tomorrow Beryl arrives, and we'll see what that will hold. But many people here believe it's going to be in the same range as something like a Hurricane Ivan, which was quite destructive, and that was about 20 years ago. Back to you.
Sam Brock in Jamaica, thank you, and stay safe. For more on Hurricane Beryl's extremely dangerous path, NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now with more. Bill, we have never seen anything like this storm this early. What is the latest?
Yeah, and just looking at Sam, that's the calm before the storm. I mean, that's it. The water behind him will be 4 to 6 feet taller in about 16 hours from right now, so probably up to about his shoulders, and the winds will be about 120 miles per hour. I mean, it's going to go like this. The storm's moving fast. It's going to be in. It's going to be out. Hurricane warnings for Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. We even have tropical storm warnings for the Dominican Republic, and the storm right now is as close as it's going to get to the Dominican Republic. Tonight, it's as close as it's going to get to the southern coast of Haiti, and you can notice the eye has disappeared a little bit. We're finally getting that weakening trend. There's a Hurricane Hunter aircraft flying into the center as I speak. We're going to get a new estimate of its intensity. It should be lower than the 155, likely still a Category 4. They're hoping that we can get this as weak as possible in the next 12 to 18 hours before it moves over the top of Jamaica. This will be during the daylight hours tomorrow, most likely the worst of it from about noon till about 8 p.m. And then the storm will race towards the Cayman Island as we go throughout the overnight hours. Then we think it's going to hold together as a hurricane now over the Yucatan. So hurricane conditions possible from Cozumel all the way to Cancun, and then over the warm waters of the Gulf. We don't like storms in the Gulf. The water is extremely warm. Now, this storm hopefully will get disrupted enough that it can't get its act together quickly to be a big threat. But notice these lines, the Texas coast, Tampico all the way up there to Corpus Christi. That's kind of the zone that we're narrowing in on as far as who has a chance to get the next impacts. That will be on Sunday.
Bill, talk to us about the weather we are seeing as it relates to heat. That has been the story the last couple weeks in the United States. Looking at the 4th of July, is heat still going to be the big headline for most Americans?
It'll be a huge headline. I mean, we got 84 million people under heat headlines still, and the temperatures out west are going to be dangerous during the daylight hours. I mean, even tomorrow, we're easily near record territory in a few spots, and it only gets hotter. Travel's not going to be too difficult tomorrow. As we get towards the 4th of July, though, we do have to watch out for thunderstorms, especially in the middle of the country, St. Louis towards areas of the Ohio Valley. But again, most people's travel will be unaffected by weather.
Bill Cairns, thank you. Turning now to the trials of former President Trump. Sentencing in the New York hush money case pushed back from the initial July 11th date as Trump's lawyers asked for more time to review the potential impact of the Supreme Court's immunity decision. That means sentencing could happen well after the Republican National Convention and possibly even later in the campaign. Here to break it all down is NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. Laura, let's just start with this idea of the timeline. We thought we were going to see this on July 11th. Can you give us the legal and logistical implications this Supreme Court ruling could have on the New York case? Okay, so let's do logistical first, since it's easier. Now, by having this pushed way out to September, it's a huge advantage to him to not have to have this done just 4 days before the RNC is supposed to meet to formally nominate him as their presidential choice. I think any delay is helpful to him. On the actual merits of it, it's going to be an uphill climb for them. The judge already looked at whether there was some sort of immunity for what he's accused of. Remember, most of the acts, the criminal acts here, reimbursing Michael Cohen for the hush money, that actually all happened while he was president in the White House, even though the conduct happened years before. The criminal part of it for prosecutors happened while he was in the White House. So prosecutors are going to have to contend with that. But I think it's still going to be an uphill climb for the defense to try to say this was all immune, this was all official acts, when it was really about private conduct. Yeah, that was the thing from the outside, as someone who doesn't have a legal background. I look at that and think, OK, well, this all started when he was a candidate. They were talking about official business as a president. It's different, but you're saying when it occurred is what matters. It's how the evidence was used. So take something tangible, like when Hope Hicks, his former aide, gets on the witness stand and describes a conversation with the former president where he says, in her telling, he acknowledged how he reimbursed Cohen. That conversation happens in the Oval while he's president. And so they're saying that should never have come in because it was official conduct. Again, I think this is an uphill battle. I think it was a Hail Mary, but it successfully managed to get the sentencing delayed. So to that extent, he won. Okay, so let's talk about what this will mean for the case in D.C., the federal case involving classified documents. Is there any avenue here for Jack Smith to say, hey, we're going to speed this up, or is it really going to be a month plus before really even pre-trial things happen? What's most fascinating to me is that we have not seen nor heard a peep out of him as it relates to trying to speed things up. So remember, this is the case where he had pushed heaven and earth to try to get it to actually go to trial before November. And yet we haven't seen any sort of movement for him to try to get it back into the trial court's hands. And that's what makes me think that he's sort of trying to grapple with what's left of this case, if anything here, really, because he's so hamstrung by the court's ruling. Laura Jarrett, thank you. Now to President Biden's re-election campaign and the growing calls within his own party for the 81-year-old to step aside after last week's disastrous debate performance. For the first time today, a Democratic member of Congress publicly called for Biden to drop his re-election bid. The White House defending the president's actions as the Biden family circles the wagons. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell has this report.
Tonight, President Biden's political future at the center of a storm.
We're going to face a tough summer.
As his only public event today focused on extreme weather and emergency management. For 5 days, the president has not answered reporters' questions.
Mr. President, will you drop out of the race?
He has relied on scripted remarks using a teleprompter.
We've invested a record more than $50 billion.
The White House said today it wants to turn the page after a debate performance crisis that some Democrats say has raised questions.
I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
Today, the first public call to exit the race from a House Democrat.
We must call on him to give the ultimate sacrifice of saying that he will step aside because that's the best way to save our country.
Another Democrat with a warning.
I just want him to appreciate at this time just how much it impacts not just his race, but all the other races coming in November.
At the White House briefing today,
he had a cold and a bad night. I would not see this as an episode.
Under repeated questioning, Karine Jean-Pierre defended the president as physically and mentally fit.
Is anyone in the White House hiding information about the president's health or his ability to do the job day to day?
Absolutely not.
The New York Times reports that in closed-door meetings, several current and former officials noticed the president increasingly appeared confused or listless or would lose the thread of conversations. New tonight, NBC News reports that first son Hunter Biden joined meetings with the president and senior staff this week in the West Wing. Reaction from senior staff described as, "What the hell is happening?" The White House had this explanation.
He came back with his dad from Camp David. He walked him into the speech prep, and he was in the room.
And Kelly O'Donnell joins us now from the White House. Kelly, we've learned the White House plans to put President Biden out for some unscripted event shortly. Is that right?
This is a strategic move. They say they want to get the president out before the public. So tomorrow he will be meeting with governors, Democratic governors, in a video conference call. He will also be talking with congressional leaders. He has not spoken to them since the debate. And Friday he'll do an on-camera televised interview, and next week a full press conference. So they want to have instances where the public can see the president doing his job, see him in unscripted moments, and responding to reporters' questions. Ellison?
Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. Thank you. For more on the concerns Biden faces from within his own party, we're joined by national political reporter at The Hill, Julia Manchester. Julia, let's talk about some news that we just got, I think, in all of our emails. President Biden is attending a fundraiser in Virginia. There were no cameras inside, but there was a group of reporters, a pool, traveling with him taking notes. And according to the pool who is with the president, he apologized for his poor debate performance and told donors in that room that he did not listen to his staff about traveling overseas in the days leading up to the debate, and that he almost fell asleep on stage. I'm curious, it's early, but have you heard anything from your sources on those remarks? Is that a moment where Biden is talking on his own, off the cuff, or is that the sort of message the campaign wants to get out to folks?
Ellison, I haven't heard anything yet. However, I haven't looked at my phone in a few seconds, though I'm sure, as with many of us, our phones will be blowing up about this. Look, I think you could look at this as being transparent, as Biden trying to be more honest and try to, convey what was happening that night. We know that he was talking about the overseas travel earlier in June, and that could have been a reason for the fatigue. But at the same time, though, it still continues to feed the narrative that President Biden, that a lot of Americans feel that President Biden is too old to be president. The excuse or the explanation of foreign travel, which could be seen as a bit of an excuse. Look, you travel as a president. You have to be in high pressure situations despite being tired. We didn't see that work out for the president on the debate stage. So I think you're seeing him be more transparent, but it's sort of an interesting situation the White House and the campaign find themselves in, because if they are transparent, that could continue to feed that narrative that has really become, since the debate, truly an Achilles heel for Biden.
Julia, I do want to play a clip for you. This is from Representative Doggett, we mentioned earlier, the first congressional Democrat to call for Biden to step down. And in this additional clip, he says that his decision is based on what he's been hearing from the people he represents in Austin, Texas. Take a listen.
I would say that the input from my constituents has been 10-1 in favor of replacing President Biden on the ticket. I thought it was time for me to speak up, not for any self-gain, but because I think the risk to our country is so great, and we need to have the strongest candidate possible.
10-1 in favor of replacing Biden. That's what he told our Hallie Jackson on NBC News Now. Is that sentiment unique to Austin, Texas, or are other Democratic lawmakers privately saying that sort of ratio is also true in their districts?
We have heard it privately from other Democratic lawmakers, and other Democratic sources have, told us that that is happening in various districts and states around the country. I think it's also interesting that on the same day that Congressman Doggett comes out and calls on Biden to step down from the ticket, we see the op-ed from Congressman Jared Golden from Maine's 2nd congressional district in the Bangor Daily News, essentially saying, look, Donald Trump's going to win, and I'm okay with that. Jared Golden represents a very, swingy district in Maine, a district that he won re-election in 2020, but former President Trump also won that same year. So even Jared Golden still says he's going to vote for Biden. I think it's telling that in such a swing district, you're hearing the lawmaker, a Democratic lawmaker, essentially making that calculation publicly.
Some of the polling that is starting to come out post-debate, there's a new one from CNN, and according to this, 56% of Democratic voters they polled said the party would have a better chance of winning the White House with someone else over Biden. A lot of people have said, wait for the polling after that bad debate performance. Now that we are starting to see the polling, do we expect there to be renewed discussions within the Biden campaign about the significance of this debate, or do we think they will stay this course of the president is someone who's used to adversity, this is another challenge, and he'll get through it? Look at the last 4 years, not just 90 minutes.
Well, it's interesting. Also in that poll, it showed Kamala Harris, the vice president, performing better against Donald Trump than Joe Biden does. So that's very telling. And, also today we heard former Congressman Tim Ryan, who ran for president, dropped out and endorsed Biden, but, knows what it's like to run in a swing district, a swing state. He came out and said Biden should drop out and that he's rallying behind Harris. So I think with this polling, you're seeing more conversation among Democrats surrounding the Biden campaign. Whether the Biden campaign, starts to have those serious discussions, I think a lot of it depends on when they get pressure on donors and if they get pressure from donors on, the president's path forward. Clearly, I think there are donors that are upset and concerned with the president's debate performance, but this will ultimately, I think they hold a lot of power as to, where the president goes from there. Now, Biden's campaign has touted his very remarkable fundraising numbers following the debate. But at the same time, though, I wouldn't say the dam's broken just yet, but it's certainly leaking when you have Tim Ryan, Lloyd Doggett, Jared Golden, making these remarks, publicly as Democrats.
Julia Manchester from The Hill, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now to a major headline from India. A crowd crushed at a religious gathering southeast of the country's capital, killing more than 100 people. NBC's international correspondent Megan Fitzgerald has more on what caused that tragedy and how the local government is responding. We do want to warn you, the following footage is likely hard to watch.
A horrifying scene in India. A deadly stampede breaking out inside a makeshift tent as a massive crowd tried to leave a Hindu gathering Tuesday. This district administrator saying, just when the event was about to culminate, there was a sudden commotion due to overcrowding and excessive humidity, which caused the stampede. Local police saying at least 116 people killed and dozens injured, most of the victims women and children. The chaos erupting in the city of Hathras, 3 hours from the capital, New Delhi. This witness saying people started falling one upon another. Those who were crushed died. People there pulled them out. Deadly stampedes not uncommon during Indian religious festivals because of large crowds and few safety measures in place, including one in 2005 when 265 people were trampled. Back in Hathras, a somber scene outside the hospital as residents carried stretchers not for patients, but for victims. Police poring over paperwork documenting the names of the deceased. The Prime Minister vowing to get all necessary help to survivors.
मैं सभी घायलों के जल्द से जल्द ठीक होने की कामना करता हूं.
A crowd gathered outside a trauma center. For many of them, it's not good news. Family and friends devastated and in disbelief. This survivor saying, I came to attend the event with 8 other people, but no one survived. Their belongings gathered and left for family members to comb through, now left to grapple with their unimaginable loss.
Local media outlets are reporting that some 15,000 people or more were gathered at this event, and the site only had permission to host about 5,000. Also this evening, Prime Minister Modi saying the government will compensate victims and their families of up to around $2,400. Ellison?
Megan Fitzgerald, thank you. Still ahead, the new Jeffrey Epstein grand jury transcripts just released. The stunning accusations that prosecutors knew Epstein was accused of abusing teen girls 2 years before reaching a plea deal, adding fuel to allegations that the agreement was far too lenient. Plus, the wildfires raging out of control in Alaska, the blaze forcing a popular national park to temporarily close, and the dramatic ocean rescue caught on camera. Several people caught up in riptides stranded at sea, the all-out efforts to bring them safely to shore. Stay with us. We're back now with shocking new details in the case of Jeffrey Epstein. Grand jury transcripts just released by a Florida judge showing prosecutors knew Epstein had allegedly raped multiple underage girls this years before they gave him what critics called a sweetheart deal. NBC News correspondent Priya Sridhar has more on what those transcripts reveal.
Tonight, stunning new revelations about the prosecution of disgraced millionaire Jeffrey Epstein. Newly released court documents revealing Florida prosecutors knew Epstein had been accused of raping multiple underage girls 2 years before offering him a plea deal, widely criticized as too lenient.
My voice was muted by the same government that was supposed to protect me.
In transcripts from a 2006 grand jury investigation released Monday, a Palm Beach police detective testified multiple underage girls had been paid to give Epstein massages and have sex with him. The girls told investigators Epstein also said, quote, "If you bring me girls, I will pay you," adding, "the younger, the better." But just 2 years later, Epstein pleaded guilty in a plea agreement which prosecutors, critics, and victims panned as a sweetheart deal, downgrading his charges to state-level prostitution counts, sentencing him to only a year and a half in jail and allowing him to frequently visit his office while serving time. The Associated Press, reporting an attorney for several of Epstein's accusers, also said prosecutors portrayed them as criminals rather than victims.
Why was Jeffrey Epstein given such grace and mercy for his inhumane crimes? And why were we so outed in the media and treated so poorly? Victim shaming in this high-profile case has damaged a lot of us.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in February signing a bill allowing secret grand jury transcripts in these types of cases to be made public.
We're happy in Florida to be leading the effort for transparency and for accountability, because what happened was clearly wrong, and the punishment was simply wholly inadequate to the crime.
15th Florida Circuit Judge Luis Delgado, who released the records, calling Epstein's alleged conduct outrageous to decent people, sexually deviant, disgusting, and criminal. Barry Krischer, the lead prosecutor in the case, could not be reached for comment, but the current Palm Beach County State Attorney, Dave Ehrenberg, telling NBC News in a statement he supported the release of the transcripts, calling the grand jury records disturbing.
The concept of prosecutorial discretion is so ingrained in our system that these victims, unfortunately, don't have a lot of recourse against prosecutors.
Now, 4 years later, new evidence that justice in this case was once again denied.
Priya Sridhar joins us now from Atlanta. Priya, what else did we learn in these newly released grand jury transcripts?
Allison, the transcripts show that Epstein had allegedly raped underage girls, some as young as 14 years old. Those teenage girls testified to detectives that they were paid in cash or rental cars to bring more girls to Epstein. Epstein's estate is now paying $155 million in restitution to more than 125 victims. Ellison?
Priya Sridhar, thank you. We have new video tonight of a dramatic water rescue at the Jersey Shore. 9 people caught in life-threatening riptides. Officers and lifeguards jumping into danger to try and save them. NBC Philadelphia reporter Ted Greenberg has this story.
There's 8, and there are 4 cans in the water.
A scramble to save lives in Ocean City, prompted by panicked calls for help.
Down street on the beach, there's people screaming, we need lifeguards immediately. Someone's getting pulled out into the ocean.
Surveillance and police body camera videos providing a dramatic look at what unfolded.
I was driving off with life.
4 people initially got caught in life-threatening rip currents around 9:30 Saturday morning, half an hour before beaches were guarded for the day.
I think my husband wanted to try and save them.
5 Good Samaritans who tried to help then began struggling as well.
It was a little chaotic at first. When I first got there, there was a lot of heads in the water.
Some of us ran down to our jet ski.
From their headquarters 3 blocks away, members of the Ocean City Beach Patrol jumped into action.
They were at least 100 yards out, maybe 150.
A dozen lifeguards sprinted into the surf, putting themselves at risk to rescue all 9 people.
You can see as the guards are holding the people out into the water because we use the jet ski to swim them in.
Firefighters also on the scene. A new police department drone providing this view from above and other critical information.
I was able to get right over top of the water and has like a heat sensor so they could see the bodies that were in the water and they could count how many people were in the water.
Within minutes, lifeguards had everyone safely back on the beach, some shaken but not seriously hurt.
The families were very emotional. It took a toll on some of our officers.
Rip currents were not the only challenge. Lifeguards say the ocean was pretty cold that day, with water temperatures around or just under 60 degrees.
It makes it a lot harder. Alone being panicked that you're away from shore, you're also dealing with that cold water that's slowing your heart rate down.
The rescue ahead of July 4th weekend leading to a warning you've heard many times before.
Nobody should be getting in the water unless that's guarded by a lifeguard.
A message underscored by images that clearly captured the risks.
And Ted Greenberg joins us now from the Jersey Shore. Ted, these sorts of incidents, they do seem to be happening more frequently this summer. Are there any warning signs officials say people should look out for when they're in the water?
Well, good question, Ellison. There are some warning signs when you're at the beach. Sometimes you can see channels of water flowing away from the beach. In this case, the big hazard was a rock jetty, which rip currents often form around. And in this case, the people who had to be rescued started on one side of the jetty, and then rip currents sucked them around to the other side. So those are some of that's a main hazard. Sometimes if there's a pier, something like that, other objects in the water, rip currents can easily form around those or are often found around those. But really, the geography and the topography in the ocean changes all the time. And where a rip current formed one day may not be there the next day or the next week or the next month. So that is why lifeguards say it is absolutely critical to not go in the water when they're not there, because they know exactly where those rip currents are and what to look out for, and they're able to warn people before they go into the water.
Ted Greenberg from NBC New York and NBC Philadelphia. Thank you. When we come back, a potential breakthrough in the fight against Alzheimer's. The FDA approving a new drug that has been slowing memory decline in clinical trials. What this could mean for those suffering from the disease. Next. Back now with Top Stories news feed, starting with Rudy Giuliani disbarred in New York. A New York appeals court ruling the man once known as America's mayor will no longer be allowed to practice law in the state because he repeatedly spread lies about the 2020 election. Giuliani is also facing charges in Georgia and Arizona for alleged election fraud. He's also an unindicted co-conspirator in a federal indictment against former President Donald Trump. Raging wildfires threatening communities across Alaska. Officials say several new fires popped up in the last 24 hours, and there are now more than 170 fires burning in the state. Nearly 500,000 acres charred so far this season. One fire burning near the entrance to Denali National Park, which has forced the temporary closure of one of Alaska's most popular tourist destinations. Some relief is expected along the southern coast, but not for fires burning inland. And the U.S. will pay Moderna $170 million to accelerate the development of a vaccine that can treat bird flu in humans. Moderna already has a bird flu vaccine in the very early stages of testing. It uses the same mRNA technology that led to their COVID-19 vaccines. So far, 3 people in the U.S. have been infected with mild cases of the virus following contact with dairy cows. Experts say the risk to humans still remains low. Now to a major headline in medicine. The FDA approving a new Alzheimer's drug. Kisunla clinical trials showing the new medicine modestly slows a decline in memory and thinking abilities in people with the disease. For more on this breakthrough, NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins us now in studio. So, Dr. Azar, I understand this is the second drug that is aimed at not ending Alzheimer's or curing it, but slowing it down.
Yeah.
Explain to us what this new drug does and how it compares to that older version that's already available.
Right, to sort of the ancestor drug.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so these two medications, Leqembi and now this Kisunla, are both in a category of medicines that are called monoclonal antibodies. And that's only important because we know that these types of medicines, these antibodies, attack certain things in our bodies. And in the case of Alzheimer's and these treatments, what they're specifically trying to get at are those amyloid plaques in the brain. Amyloid plaques, part of what we call the amyloid hypothesis, is this sort of collection of abnormal protein that we think is at least in part responsible for the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And so all the participants who got the drug, Ellison, had to have evidence not only of early mild cognitive impairment, but evidence of those amyloid plaques in their brain. And that was one of the endpoints that they were monitoring to see if those plaques actually resolved with treatment.
For a lot of people, the idea of this drug is a godsend. Is there any indication on price? How soon people may be able to talk to their doctors about actually getting prescribed this, and how to know if you or your loved one are right for something like this?
For this. All great questions. Yeah. So right now, the price for one treatment for one patient would be about $32,000 a year, compared to, I think, around $26,000 a year for Leqembi. Very, very expensive. When and because it's FDA approved for this certain indication, Medicare very likely will approve it. Commercial insurances probably will as well. In terms of who's the right candidate, well, it is people with early disease. And that kind of brings us to the other point of earlier detection for so many, potentially millions of people who could be at risk for Alzheimer's is so important, because catching the disease early is really kind of like the only real hope I think people have in terms of really trying to slow down the disease. So it's people with early mild cognitive impairment, not advanced disease, and people who do have evidence of these amyloid plaques in the brain.
And since you talked about the importance of early detection, remind us what we need to look out for in ourselves and our loved ones.
Right. So, earliest stages, we're talking about issues with memory. There can be cognitive changes, your ability to carry out tasks and comprehension and thinking, and could be mood changes, a whole variety of things. And, certainly a family history of Alzheimer's would raise suspicion that if you're having some of these symptoms, it could be that. But I don't want to scare our viewers unnecessarily. There are a lot of these things that happen normally as we age. But if you or a loved one is starting to get concerned about it, then, getting attention and having this investigated and diagnosed is incredibly important.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you. Now let's turn to the latest at the southern border. A Homeland Security official telling NBC News authorities apprehended about 84,000 migrants who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border in June. That is the lowest monthly number since President Biden took office in 2021. The numbers come just weeks after his administration announced an executive action that would temporarily shut down the border when daily crossings surged over 2,400. For more on this, let's bring in NBC's Liz Kreutz. Liz, talk to us about these numbers, this drop. Is there any word from human rights groups, government officials, or just contacts on the ground as to what they think is really driving it? Has news of the executive action actually reached people making this journey?
Hey, Ellison, well, I think that folks see this as being because of a number of factors, but certainly the Biden administration is going to point to the executive action that was taken last month that they're saying is going to have an impact on the number of migrants trying to make their way across the border right now. This executive action also says migrants cannot claim asylum if they cross the border illegally. So certainly word is likely made it to some of these smuggling groups, to these migrants, and it might be a situation that's often seen when there's a major policy shift with the U.S. border, that it's sort of a wait and see situation where these groups groups are waiting to see what happens, and that could initially lead to a drop in these numbers. But there's also other factors as well, Ellison, including the fact that it's hot there right now. There's record heat in these regions, so that could be playing a role too, but it does come off a steady drop in border crossings over the past few months, Ellison.
And we're talking about the idea of people waiting to see. Do we know right now if the Biden administration is likely to keep the restrictions they currently have in place going through the fall?
I know that a lot of our colleagues, Ellison, that are reporting on this feel like because that threshold is so low for the number of border crossings per day that it is very likely that it could continue for many months still. I think it's about 1,500 per day. Right now, there's about 2,000. So it's likely that that number will hold. And it's also potentially likely we could continue to see a dip in the number of migrants crossing throughout the summer, given the heat, and also the fact that there has been an increase in interdictions by Mexico as well, a tripling from Mexico too, Ellison.
And Liz, before we let you go, I wanted to ask you about Panama, because Panama's newly inaugurated president is working with the United States to try and reduce migration in the region. What do we know about that arrangement?
Yeah, this is a really interesting situation here where essentially the U.S. is going to be paying Panama to intervene with the Darien Gap, where there's often many of the migrants make their way there through the Central America up to the U.S. This is often referred to as a human superhighway. It's a very treacherous journey. And so this is specifically aimed at trying to close the Darien Gap to illegal migrants. It's a $6 million pilot program. It will begin in the coming weeks, Ellison. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think the fact that we're continuing to see these headlines, we're seeing this new policy announced this week, is just a sign of how much the Biden administration realizes this is such a top issue during an election year. Immigration considered a top 3 issue for voters right now, Ellison.
Yeah, it appears in the top in almost every single poll. Liz Kreutz, thank you so much. We appreciate all of that reporting. Turning now to the Americas and the fallout in Bolivia following last week's attempted coup. The country's former president accusing his political rival and the country's current president of staging the entire thing. But many are questioning if this is a political move ahead of next year's election, where he plans to run again. NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra has the latest.
For hours, all eyes were on Bolivia, seemingly under an attempted coup d'etat. On June 26th, armored vehicles ramming against the presidential palace in the capital city of La Paz, with the president inside. Smoke bombs and tear gas filling the streets. General Juan Zuniga seemingly leading the siege. President Luis Arce, known as Lucho, coming out of the palace to confront the general face-to-face, demanding he stand down. On the streets outside, people chanted, "Lucho, the people stand by you." And General Zuniga was taken away. Arce stood triumphant with a raised fist in front of an adoring crowd. But as Zuniga was being arrested, the general claimed to a crowd of cameras that the president put him up to it, saying President Arce asked him to stage a coup to boost his own popularity. Former President Evo Morales, who will face Arce in an election next year, initially stood by the president. But now Morales joining Zuniga's claim, writing, Arce deceived and lied to the Bolivian people and the world, calling for a complete and independent investigation. What kind of coup has 0 injuries, 0 shootings, and 0 deaths?
It seems to me that regardless of what actually happened, because it actually doesn't matter that much for Evo Morales, who wants to be president again, that simply jumping on that bandwagon clearly will weaken his rival.
Eric Langer, professor of history at Georgetown University, says regardless of what is true, taking any stance is political. The U.S. State Department careful in its response to NBC News.
So we're continuing to monitor the situation in Bolivia, as I imagine many in the international community are. We understand and have taken note the number of viewpoints that have emerged in recent days, and we welcome independent analysis into the events of June 26th.
As calls for an independent investigation grow louder, Arce's government has denied all claims. Arce fighting back, responding online, clearly what happened was a failed military coup. So far, at least 21 have been arrested, according to the Bolivian government, facing charges of terrorism and starting an armed uprising. But with Bolivia still in a dire financial crisis and an election between Arce and Morales next year, the people of Bolivia uneasy about what lies ahead.
The long-term impact on Bolivia is greater instability. And what that means is that the ability for Bolivia to get out of the economic mess is much less so because they are now in a political mess much greater than they were before.
Marissa Parra, NBC News.
Coming up, the patron saint of the internet, the Pope, and a group of cardinals approving the first millennial saint who's been called God's influencer. How he used social media to spread the word of God, and the 2 acts that are getting him sainthood. That is next. We are back with a special edition of Global Watch. He's being called the patron saint of the internet. Pope Francis and a group of cardinals approving the sainthood of the first millennial. The Vatican hoping the late teens canonization helps captivate younger generations of Catholics. Tonight, a new era for the Catholic Church. Pope Francis and a group of cardinals approving the first millennial saint for canonization. Carlo Acutis, an Italian teenager who's been called God's influencer, the patron saint of the internet, and is credited for using social media to spread the word of God before his death at the age of 15 from leukemia in 2006.
And in Carlos, I see the action of God.
NBC's Marissa Parra spoke with Carlo's mother when the Pope first approved his path to sainthood.
Since he was small, he was a special child, very generous, helping the others, was very devout, used to go to Mass each day.
And while his loved ones remember his kindness, the Vatican recognizing his sainthood for what they claim are 2 miracles. Families in Brazil and Italy say their children overcame illness after praying to Carlo.
For someone to be made a saint in the Catholic Church, it normally takes decades, sometimes centuries. The Church does a real investigation and study of their life.
A recent Pew Research poll of millennials who identify as Catholic show less than half say religion is very important in their life. Christopher White, a Vatican correspondent, says he believes St. Carlo might be the Pope's way of trying to connect with a younger generation of Catholics.
He sees someone that used technology for good, not for ill. And in making a millennial a saint, he's able to say that young people have a prominent role in the Catholic Church today. And in both of those issues, the Pope has sort of found his person in Carlos Acutis.
And Carlo's reach is extensive. There's a 24/7 live stream of his tomb at the Church of St. Mary Major in Assisi. It's also accompanied by a shrine. The Catholic news agency says more than 41,000 people visited the site for a celebration in 2020.
Many young people that are involved in charity works because they are imitating Carlo. So I think it's a good, as the Pope called Carlo, influencer of God, because really is influencing people to the good, no?
Carlo Acutis is expected to officially become a saint during the Church's Jubilee in 2025, an event that Catholics from all over the world travel to Rome for. Now, they'll get to see Carlo's influence enshrined in the Catholic Church forever. All right, that does it for us. Thank you for watching Top Story. I'm Ellison Barber. Stay right there because more news now is on the way.
You could hear the galvanize on the roof just having its own conversation, and you're really just hoping for the best. And all around me, there were houses in the village. Their roofs were flying past. I don't think there's anybody on the island or even in the ground.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.